Previously on agentpalmer.com, Miller and Manus might be the one sci-fi duo to follow. I have read one of the worst books ever, The Laptop Millionaire, and while last episode was Volume 4 of One Final Question, Volume 5 is fast approaching. This is the Palmer Files, episode 123, with Danno Sullivan, a comedian, podcaster, musician, and long-lost Marx Brother? Distant Mark's cousin, I believe. He's here to discuss the ukulele, being a comedy show-off, vaudeville, being communicators, and so much more. Are you ready? Let's do the show! Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this episode 123 is Danno Sullivan. Danno is Boston's ukulele kingpin, as well as being a comedian and writer who also happens to be an expert in many fields, which he showcases on the podcast Expertise. That's EXPERTEASE. What starts as a conversation about what we do and who we are evolves into a discussion about vaudeville and its many children in many mediums, plus classic comedy and classic rock, juggling and the accordion, teaching and patience, being social, and well, all of that and a whole lot more is coming your way shortly. But first, remember that if you want to discuss the episode as you listen or afterwards, you can find all related ways to contact my guest, Danno Sullivan, and myself in the show notes. Danno's work can be found online at funnypodcast.co or playitdailyukulele.com. Don't forget you can see all of my writings and rantings on agentpalmer.com, and of course, email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's get into it. Danno, you are a comedian. And in comedy, I would say you're in podcasting and you're a musician. I guess had we met at a party, and I asked you what you did, and I didn't know of your online social things, which would you lead with?
That's actually a great way to ask that specific question, because if we were at a party, I would probably give you a different answer than I would if I knew you were just going to ask that question on a podcast.
Okay.
Because my job is musician. I play ukulele and teach ukulele and have courses and classes and love ukulele. I love music, but I express that through ukulele.
Okay.
And it's a very easy thing to talk about, because as soon as you say music, everyone knows what you're talking about. And as soon as you say ukulele, people kind of light up and say, oh, it's so cute. And they have lots of questions from their childhood. They know somebody or they've tried it. On the other hand, I'm sure you've experienced this. If you say, oh, I do a podcast, people kind of glaze over, stare vacantly, change the subject, reach for the canopies.
I had almost maybe I had almost a decade of blogging under my belt before I started my podcast. So I was used to the just summarizing oh, I'm a writer and now I'm a podcaster, and I got to join them together so they could glaze over all of the things all really quickly all at once. Yeah. Because I've
actually been toying with the idea of just using a different word than podcast.
Okay.
Because my background is in show business. I did comedy and acting and improvisation and screenwriting. So there was a time when I was not ashamed to say the thing that I did that was related to, being a comedy show off.
But
there's something about the word podcasting that really kind of smacks people upside the head in a weird way. Do you find that at all?
Not as such, but then again, I very much, a friend of mine gave me this, and I always forget what it is. I think he said you are a features writer and a online conversationalist.
Okay.
And so in essence, that's kind of what I do. But there's also a part of me that's like, I don't like content creator because I feel like not for any other reason than it demeans this episode. It demeans the writing and the work I put into my writing.
Right.
But I don't know. I'm still amazed podcast has a cachet that it does. Like it feels like every time I keep reading, like in the mainstream media about podcasting, it's either the end or the birth of it.
Yes.
Again.
Yeah.
And again. And it
just keeps happening over and over and over.
Yeah, we're in an endless cycle. I guess as long as we hold on to the train.
But other forms of entertainment really did die. Vaudeville died. Radio shows died. TV, slowly but surely, is dying.
Well, okay. So it's interesting you bring up vaudeville first because, like,
it's where I live, man. That's where my mind is at.
Okay, so when you say vaudeville, especially when you say you play the ukulele, my brain goes to one place. Okay.
Can I guess?
Yeah, sure.
I'm just going to say you're 1920s. Are you shooting for the 1920s?
No. Much later.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
No. I immediately go to Tiny Tim. Immediately.
Oh,
that's
okay.
And that's because I'm young. I'm too young. Like I didn't exist when Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In and that kind of golden age of that kind of television was around. But I have since gone back. Like when I discovered it, I went back and I
made an active choice to go back and discover Tiny Tim.
Yeah. In a manner of speaking. Yeah. And so it opens this whole world of where a lot of this stuff comes from.
Yeah.
And sadly, Laugh-In's the one that's easier to get than the Smothers Brothers, which is a little bit harder to find.
Yep. And I'm such a comedy connoisseur, man. When you start talking about these specific names and specific acts and genres and eras, it's just right up my alley, and I love it so much. And so I would say that the Smothers Brothers is less vaudeville than Laugh-In,
okay,
for example. And for, I don't know how old your audience skews for this particular.
I can tell you, at least from the people that reach out, I run the gamut.
Yeah, old and young, right?
Yeah.
And the great thing is that even though I was joking and said vaudeville had died, and it has, you cannot go see a vaudeville show. Obviously, that's simply no place, but its influence and even its exact underpinnings live on in things like, you mentioned Rowan and Martin, that was still the 60s, but probably everybody would still know the Muppet Show.
Yeah, the Marx Brothers too. I mean, the Marx Brothers don't. I feel like it's, one of the things that I think might be timeless about the Marx Brothers specifically is they honed their craft on vaudeville stages. So those movies were just all the things that worked in front of audiences, which is something that, like, is kind of something I don't think enough comedians get enough credit for of the craft of it.
Oh gosh, yeah. In their case, years and years and years of honing material and crafting that material and creating something wonderful that they knew an audience would like, and then finally putting it on film, like you said. It was, almost surefire.
Yeah, it really was. And one of the things that kept me in going back to Laugh-In and watching it was not only that I knew a lot of the names and faces from like other things. Like I remember watching Hogan's Heroes, like with my grandparents. So like some of those actors show up in the show, and I knew of Goldie Hawn and, all of the big movie stars at the time that like have little bit parts I knew. But what kept me going back was not the names and the faces. It was the fact that writing,
that it was actually funny.
It was funny, but it was also timeless. I mean, sadly, in the cyclical nature of the world, that humor is now relevant again. Those jokes still play very well. And
you mentioned the Smothers Brothers, and Laugh-In did this too, with maybe a little more tongue in cheek and a little less of a trying to provoke the powers that be. But yeah, that political humor, it feels like it's such a thing of its time. And then it comes around in a cycle again. You think, oh, wow, we've lived through this. And it's funny that you can express it through comedy, because that feels like the sort of thing that you express through a history class or a very scholarly study. What are the cycles? What things repeat themselves politically? But you can do it with comedy, absolutely. And you mentioned my other output, which is music. Oh my gosh.
I'm okay. So I haven't talked about this on the show yet. And this is one of the few things, like I've done a lot of things for the sake of the podcast and for the sake of the blog, as far as like research or,
I thought you were going to say nudity or.
No.
Okay. Got it.
Not that far. But then again, I could be, but this is audio only, so they'll never know.
Oh, for the folks listening at home,
yeah,
I can see and I know. Don't worry, we're all safe.
But I have been for my own, I guess, research / edification. I went back and I made a list. I had a lunch with my father for the sheer sake of that we have similar music tastes, and I wanted to learn more about my own musical tastes. So I made a list of like 15 bands. And some of them are obvious: the Beatles, the Stones, Bob Dylan. Some of them maybe not so obvious to other people, like say Frank Zappa and like the Allman Brothers. And I was like, I know, and Led Zeppelin. Like I know some of these bands. I don't know all of these things. And I said, I'm going to listen to them from the very beginning in chronological order. The Byrds was another one. And I just want to know how they bounce off each other. Because like I've always heard, that Dylan was an influence of a lot of people.
Right.
I don't know how, like other than the Byrds covering them or like somebody covering, like you don't know how. And so I'm in, I obviously started in 1960 and, I try and listen to an album a day, and it's reignited my passion for music. It's reignited my love of the album as an art piece as well. Right. But it's,
and this is all leading right back to Tiny Tim, isn't it?
Not really, but it is kind of one of those things where it's like, I'm hearing these things as like, had I been alive at the time and I would have been a fan, I probably would have still been a fan of those things. And I'm in the early 70s now. And there are some albums that stand like apart from everything else. And it's not even like timelessness of it, but almost every Dylan album feels like up to this point. Like, and he's gone electric already, sacrilege. Oh my God. But like he has a message in every album, not in just every song, but in every album. And Pet Sounds from the Beach Boys sounds like it could have came out last year.
Yeah.
I knew a lot of these songs. I just didn't know a lot of the albums on whole.
Right. And the context around them actually lends a lot. If you love the songs, you may love the albums, and you very likely, if you delve into it, you'll start to love the stories around them. And
so that's where I was going with this. Was Zappa has been the revelation for me, because I going into this, I knew Zappa as a almost like a Tiny Tim, like a comedic musician.
Yeah,
and
just
then
a nut, a novelty nut.
All of a sudden, like there are like whole sides of albums that are just like, this is amazing jazz fusion that what is going on here? It's not funny at all. This is like amazing and good and serious. And it's kind of opened my eyes to like, well, like I liked it all along, but I didn't know of it. And I didn't know I liked it.
Yeah, you have my admiration. I've tried with Zappa and have not yet succeeded. But man, oh man, I've 100% had that experience of kind of finding something, realizing that, oh, the whole world knows about this, but I'm the new kid who's just wandered into the neighborhood and discovered this on my own.
Well, and I mean, granted, it's generational. Like, I mean, this is the music generally of my father and not of me.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I grew up on Aerosmith, and I wanted to know, like, I know all of these bands are their influences. So it's like,
Right.
all right, where does this come from? And I liked Guns N' Roses, and I've been a voracious reader for a long time, and I've read a lot of music biographies. So like,
Sure.
Despite the fact that I'm listening to these albums maybe for the first time for me,
Mm-hmm.
I've read the musicians that influenced me a lot talk about this
Right. Yeah.
music. It's where it starts.
Do you remember a few years ago, shockingly late in history, Little Richard died?
Yeah.
And I remember it kind of blew my mind to think that I'd had that experience, Oh, Little Richard, he's the one that influenced the Beatles and the Stones. And, he was still around, still playing music, still being Little Richard until 5 years ago?
Yeah. And it goes back to Laughing and kind of like the Steve Martin and the Saturday Night Live of it all. And it's like,
oh, right.
and the Smothers Brothers, and like all the things that grew out of like those two shows specifically.
Right. And we're speaking only within the limited perspective of our own time realm.
Yeah.
But, it's so interesting to me to think how that just keeps cycling back and cycling back. And you mentioned your dad, he probably had a similar experience with the stuff that he loved. What was 30 years ahead of him,
Yeah.
And that's a big difference for our generation. We grew up on what is now classic rock, but our parents, 30 years ahead of them, it was not rock and roll. It was Glenn Miller and big band. And
yeah.
So the change for them from childhood to adulthood was a vastly different experience than we would have had going from rock to more rock.
Well, and it's also funny that like the classic rock station from 20 years ago is playing the same stuff from 20 years ago. Like that.
It's still classic. It never changes.
Yeah.
I have a daughter who's in her early 20s and a son who's 18. And it blows my mind how much their generation listens to classic rock. And, they're, dare I say, cool kids. And they listen to stuff of today. They know what's going on. But they've got this huge mental space for what, the good stuff from the good old days.
And so I can sit here and I can lament the death of the album as an art form. I absolutely can. But I can also say that their access to streaming is what allows them to go back to CCR and Dylan and the band in a way that I only had access to the albums that that either my parents had or that they kept, which is a very different idea than what they had.
If you really wanted to get into Tiny Tim at this point, you can do it. All you have to do is dig a little bit. And there was a time when rediscovering Tiny Tim really would have been a challenge. I'm sorry, I keep bringing up Tiny Tim. I just think it's funny that you mentioned him.
Well, he's the guy I think of when I think of like that's
right.
Well,
you know what? He's actually a perfect example of what you're talking about. He was kind of a carrier of that really old style music, that 1920s, 1930s, Rudy Tooty, ha-cha-cha.
Yeah.
Charleston, ragtime's too far back, but those 1920s novelty songs is what I think he loved. And he was doing it in the early 1960s. And here we are talking about him in 2024. And he really did serve as a bridge. I don't admire him as a performer, but I do admire him as somebody who really loved the music and did the best that he could with it, and did actually an extraordinary job of bringing it to the public. Who would have thought? I think he had a #1 hit, and he was certainly a cultural figure for a good spell of time.
And
do we need to tell people who he is? I don't know.
I don't know either. Like, I feel like that's, if you're interested, you'll go the extra mile, right? Like
it's not the Dickens character. We'll just say that.
No. And on the opposite end of the height scale, from the Dickens character as well. Yes.
Yeah. Tall, not short.
So then I would ask you, what comes first, comedy or music? Like what growing up?
Gosh. I love music, and it has accidentally become a job for me.
Okay.
A good job that I enjoyed. So don't get me wrong. But comedy is what I've always done. I made a move from California, where you can make a living in show business, to Massachusetts, where you can't very easily.
Okay.
And kind of accidentally worked my way into this job that makes me laugh to say that I have, which is helping people who want to learn ukulele.
I mean, it's great, but it does beg the question of, like, do you think you're happier in music? Like, which seems maybe a little more stable right now than comedy and show business in general. But, like, I don't know, if we had this conversation a few years ago, I would have been like, well, comedy's probably the way to go. Like, it probably ebbs and flows.
Yeah. I mean, my comedy career right now is only doing my podcast, which is very funny and very satisfying and pleasing to do. But I don't know about you, but I don't get rich doing a podcast.
No.
Okay.
I've, for better or worse, I've purposely made decisions in order to make this podcast as enjoyable for me as it may be for the audience, in an effort to keep it going. So,
right, yeah.
Whereas if somebody wanted me to, like, I'm sure all the podcast gurus are like, you can't just have a conversation podcast where you don't talk to the same kind of person. Like, you have,
right.
And so I'm already, like, not on their, bucket list. And, they're like, well, at a certain point you need this, and this. And I'm like, well, I'm over 100 episodes, so I must be doing something right. I'm not, I'm still doing it. And I don't think you start a show to make money.
Yeah.
At the very least,
people do.
You can, but I don't think you start a lasting show.
Yeah. And honestly, it's like, any field. Some people, there are people that are the dedicated nuts that do it because they love the craft, whatever the craft may be. And there are people that are on the opposite end of that spectrum.
Yeah.
How can I grab hold of this and sell it to the suckers?
Yeah. Well,
and if you're doing a real estate podcast, or it's the same as doing those real estate shows on TV. There's a market for that, and
there must be, because they keep making them. Like, that's
right.
That's the other thing. Like, that's on TV specifically, because, like, you and I can do this out of our pocket, or cheaply, or for free, and but nobody's going to put us on NPR or, like, syndicate it necessarily unless they really like it. I mean, we're both open to it. Like, if whoever's out there, like, we'll take your money. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, we could just change the subject right now to real estate, if that's the way to do this.
Yeah, no, I don't know anything about it.
Come on, let's make something up.
Looks through pages. The market goes up and then it comes back down.
Well, so far we've managed to keep things pretty obscure with Tiny Tim, the Marx Brothers, Rowan and Martin's Laughing.
Would you say? Wait a minute. Wait. Maybe it's my circle, though. Like, I don't see. Maybe Laughing might be obscure, and definitely Tiny Tim, but the Marx Brothers have to be. No.
You're asking the wrong person. I'm such a fan of the Marx Brothers. Did you notice the spelling of my name?
I did. I mean, so this is what I will say. I introduced, like, my partner. She knew about the Marx Brothers, like, she knew of them, but, like, when she finally moved in, I was like, all right, we're doing this.
It's time. And
so we went through about half of the. I have the Silver Collection box set.
Right. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
And so and what's ridiculous to me is just, I still laugh. Like, I'm not, this is not a judgment thing. I know comedy is subjective as anything else. But
Right.
like, I don't laugh. Like, I can enjoy an Adam Sandler movie, especially like the classic Happy Gilmore stuff.
Right.
But I will not laugh at the jokes anymore. I will still laugh through a Marx Brothers movie. I just can't help. I don't know. It's foundational to my being. I can't not laugh at those jokes.
Yeah. There's such, oh gosh, we're going to get all pretentious on silly comedy now, but there's such deep character types that they exist in a way that a Adam Sandler film does not. There's a level of the world that they create seems to actually exist, as bizarre and nonsensical as it is. And it's such a delightful, weird world that I think for people that love them, it's as much loving the jokes per se, the jokes and the comedy, as it is just kind of having this fascination with the characters and the world that they seem to inhabit that simply doesn't make any sense. I wonder if there's an overlap with like people who love Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland, where there's just such a level of nonsense that you have to buy into something vastly beyond the joke.
Yeah. Yeah. Although it does lead me to this question for you, which is, do you play any other instruments? Because like I play a lot of instruments. Okay. A lot. I play bass and guitar. That shouldn't count as a lot because those are overlap a lot.
Well, it's a lot more than zero.
But because of the Marx Brothers, specifically, Chico, I regret not being able to play the piano. Now, would I be able to play the piano in that way, even if I could play? Probably not. But it's the one instrument that kind of got away.
That's really funny, but not the harp, like harpo?
Like that. I'll be honest. I look at that and I go, he's a god. I don't know how that's real. Magic is real. I don't know how anybody plays the harp.
That's right. And then there was trombono. He was not in too many of the movies, but
no, I was a reed instrument. I played saxophone, so I could never get the brass ones down.
Yeah, but that's great to take your inspiration where you find it. And I find that very intriguing that you got some musical inspiration from a comedy troupe.
Yeah, but I still can't play the piano though. Like that's,
Well, you can't blame the Marx Brothers for that.
Well, I mean, I could try. They're not going to stop me, I guess. That's, so anyway, do you like, what else do you have other than the ukulele? Is there more? Most people who play music mess around on different instruments. And so I've messed around. My first instrument was 5-string banjo. Didn't get very good at it. Learned it from a book and learned years later that I had learned literally to do it upside down. Okay.
So messed around with guitar a little bit and accordion. I used to do a juggling show, speaking of my comedy past. And we incorporated the accordion that we got at a garage sale into the juggling act, which so I had to learn one song on the accordion.
That is it. Okay. So I can juggle. I don't know. I think I picked it up at summer camp when I was like 10. And I never forgot, but I can ask you this. What was harder to learn, the song on the accordion or juggling?
Basic juggling, as I'm sure you learned at summer camp, is not that hard.
Not that hard.
And for me, actually, it was a great entree into performing comedy because I realized anybody could stand up on stage and throw around 3 balls, and that the goal was to make it entertaining.
Yes.
Hence the accordion, as you can well imagine.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I do a lot of things that I associate actually back to my juggling days, where I realize it's just a finger skill or a muscle skill.
Sure.
That juggling takes a little bit of coordination, but anybody can do it with a little bit of practice. And honestly, I don't perform music these days. I teach music. And I use that as a comparison point all the time. If you're trying to learn to move your fingers around on strings, you're not necessarily will make it musical automatically, but you can learn the skills with just a little bit of time. And then there's more that evolves from that. How do you make it sound musical? How do you make it sound interesting and build on that? But they're all just juggling skills.
Okay. So every time I have someone on who's a teacher of anything, I have to ask this question. It's like, for me, I feel like I think I ask this in my personal life when I meet teachers too. Because it's something I don't have. And I'm aware that I don't have it. But I don't know that I'll ever get it. And that is, you're a teacher. Where's the patience come from?
Oh,
like because you have to have some, or at least more than me.
Well, you may be asking the wrong person, because honestly, my approach is, I hope you like my approach, because this is the only approach I have.
Okay. All right. Okay. So you're not that patient then.
I'm not that patient, but maybe this is all it is. We were joking around about Tiny Tim being such a lover of the music that he presented. And that is very much me. I'm not as tall. My hair's not as long. My pallor's not as pallid. But I love the music that the ukulele in particular represents. That old time music, and then it kind of came around again in the early 60s. And now people are using it as a real instrument, less as, that jokey ukulele. It's just, we need the sound. Let's use the ukulele. So I love it at many levels. And there is a great thrill to sharing that love with somebody. And I was not joking about my lack of patience. I think I don't mind having the patience to teach somebody the skills, but I don't want to teach somebody that's not interested. If they love the music, I can get them to a respectable level.
Okay. All right. And does, I guess for my own edification, does it help or hurt? Like if I was going to audit for a class, does it help or hurt that I have, like guitar and bass knowledge? Like, cause sometimes that feels like, while the dexterity's there, I also immediately go to certain shapes and things.
Right. Yeah. No, there's a huge overlap from guitar to ukulele. One of my pet peeves is that a lot of people perceive the ukulele as kind of a stepping stone to playing guitar. Okay. Because they're so similar in the finger skills and the music knowledge. And it certainly can serve as that, but it frustrates me because I think of the ukulele as an end goal in itself. And in fact, maybe now we're getting down into the weeds. It's kind of the opposite in many ways, because the ukulele only has 4 strings compared to the 6 strings of the guitar. You can learn a lot of stuff more easily, more quickly, and more deeply in your brain on ukulele, and implement it more directly. So if you're playing rock and roll, you're going to switch over to the guitar at some point, and the ukulele could be a good stepping stone. But if you're playing almost any other kind of music, the ukulele can very well be a means, an end in and of itself.
Okay. Well,
now you got me up on my ukulele high horse.
There is a ukulele in my house.
No surprise.
Steph wants to learn it, and she doesn't practice nearly as much as she should. And I've threatened, because I've only messed around a little bit, but I've threatened. I'm like, I will get better at this than you, and this is yours. That's
well, the perception is that it's a toy, and I think for somebody who wants to get better, get an instrument that's not a toy in the first place. Buy a nice instrument, and then start putting the work in a little bit.
Yeah,
and
I look at it as like it's, for me, the ukulele, and I don't want to pigeonhole this, and I mean no disrespect, but I have the ukulele and the mandolin kind of in a similar boat in my brain, where it's like I got, in the last maybe decade, I got on a very big acoustic guitar kick. I just stopped picking up my electric on even a regular, like even an annual basis. It was just like all acoustic. I don't know what happened. Cause you could say it was because I turned 40, but like that was recently, and this happened well before I turned 40. So like and so the mandolin and the ukulele both hold this place where it's like, oh, those are cool intros that I'd need another instrument to learn. Because while I can play maybe the riff on for mandolin or ukulele on the guitar, it will never sound like either of those instruments on the guitar. And it's just such a unique sound to them unto themselves. And so that's where I go, maybe I should really put some time into those, but I don't have a mandolin, so it would have to be a ukulele.
You know, I blame the Marx Brothers. Why don't you have a mandolin?
We can well, you know, for that one though, we should blame Groucho, because we already blamed Chico for the piano thing. So like, we gotta spread it out. And again, Harpo's a god. I don't know how it's magic. I don't know how anybody look. You know, ukulele's 4. I was a bass player first. That's 4. Guitar 6. That's fine. I can 6. Cool. All right. That's too many strings for an instrument. I'm sorry. He's greedy.
For the harp. Yeah, it's something like, I don't even know how many strings on a harp, but I'm going to guess dozens of strings.
Dozens. Yes, dozens. I concur with your expert opinion. Dozens. That's
music talk. You know, you may need to edit that out so we don't bore people. But
no. I mean, look, it's we're not talking about harmonics, and you know, I feel like maybe once in my life in stage crew, I moved a harp once, so it's possible I accidentally brushed it, and I presume that's the equivalent of playing it. So
close enough. Yeah.
I've played it once, novice, great. I'll add that to my music resume.
Brushed harp.
Oh, I mean, look, I could play the drums a bit, so I can't say like I brushed them, but I did use brushes on a drum. So I have a brushed drum too. So,
yeah, I feel like I'm doing my job here and helping you expand your resume.
I mean, this is just, eventually one of these, none of these skills are hireable, unfortunately, but
that's my expertise.
Well, so. Well, so I want to go back for a moment though. The ukulele and comedy, did you go to school for any of these things, or what did you do to help, I don't know, facilitate your love and want to go further with either, as a young child person?
I started off as a baby.
Yeah.
Yes. So actually I'm fascinated that you're fascinated by the ukulele, which granted that I'm known as Boston's ukulele kingpin. So people ask me about it a lot. Kind of gives me a tough edge to the whole dainty little ukulele thing.
Yeah. Kingpin and ukulele, not often together.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so I think it's something you can wear. We should get you a crown. Definitely.
But it's the newest phase of my odd and varied life. And I've always loved music and always played something like the accordion. But it really was just a move to the East Coast and knocking around with a hobby that I loved, which was ukulele, and missing a little gang of fellow uke players in California. And I put together a little club, and the club needed somebody to lead it. And then people needed lessons, and one thing led to another. But prior to that, for my entire life, all comedy, all the time.
Okay.
And there are places you can go for comedy training. You can go to screenwriting school if you want to write comedies. You can go to clown college. I know several people who've gone through that experience. And you cannot joke about it. They take it very seriously.
I remember I don't know who the guest was. This is the problem. So not only do I have a problem remembering the guests who have been on my show and when, but like one of my favorite podcasters is Mark Maron. And I specifically remember him having a long conversation with one of his guests who had been to and took the clown college thing like, I think it was the first time I had ever heard somebody talk about it in exactly how you're putting, like, just, they don't joke about it.
Yeah.
It's a serious thing.
Yeah.
And that was my first kind of, I don't remember who the guest was, but like, I was enraptured by it. Cause I was like,
oh, it's a spellbinding world. I mean, just imagine your classmates are elephants and unicyclists.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, yeah. So anyway,
Can I interject and tell you a funny Mark Maron tale?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you love Mark Maron from his podcast. I actually barely knew him when I was in New York City. And I was writing on a very early internet comedy show. And at the last minute, they hired Mark Maron to be the host of this almost pre-internet comedy show. So that was my overlap with him.
Nice.
And so we'd kind of hang around in the same places every once in a while. We weren't really coworkers. And at the time, I was just finishing up that job and getting ready to move off to California to be a Hollywood superstar, because that's how you do it.
Yeah.
And somehow Mark Maron got wind of this, and he said, "Hey man, you know anybody who's got an apartment?" And I said, "Yeah, the apartment I'm moving out of right now is available." So Mark Maron sublet my apartment from me, and this little show came up on the almost pre-internet, and I had to tune in and listen to it and see how they had destroyed my handiwork or not. And Mark Maron's doing this kind of ad-libbed monologue, and he does this bit about, so I rented this apartment from this guy, and he left his freaking mattress behind. And I was the guy that left the freaking mattress behind. So,
all right. So this is the real question I have from that story is, I've never been a comedy writer. I've mainly written for myself. What's it like to write something and then watch and be like, I don't know, how are they going to handle what I wrote? Or I guess the more important question is, are you more worried that it will or won't get the air, or that it will or won't be, I don't know, handled proper the way you envision?
Why would you be worried that it would be handled properly? I don't follow you on that one.
I guess, okay, that's fair. I mean, are you worried of if it's going to make the air or not, or if it will be misappropriated, I guess?
I see what you mean. Yeah. The only word there, I guess there are twin worries. Okay. One is that it'll be handled terribly.
Okay.
And then of course that shines back on you as the writer. The opposite is also true, that it will sail beautifully and they completely forget about the writer. Oh, the guy that performed it is so funny. And all the credit goes to the guy in the spotlight. And it's completely understandable. I've performed comedy too. And of course you get the laugh. You want the laugh, you accept the laugh, and you accept it on behalf of, all the little people behind you in the shadows. But yeah, it's still your laugh.
This is now, see, now I've rendered myself incapable of like original thought now, because now I immediately think of a cold open of The West Wing, where Toby, the speechwriter, and the president are arguing about a specific section and whether it was foolproof or it was the speech, like, is it the content or the delivery?
Yeah.
And that's another one where it's like, I'm kind of really glad that I write for myself, because I can take credit for a great delivery, but on a poor delivery, I can still take credit for great writing. So like I can find a way to spin it so I end up in a good place regardless.
Yeah. That's perfect. Well, we were talking about all the comedy greats, and that's supposedly the reason Monty Python exists, because they were all great writers and they got annoyed with other people not handling their writing well. So they said, well, maybe we just better perform it ourselves then. And I've been pretty lucky, honestly. Most of what I've done has been in the world of improv, sketch comedy, and it's been working with people that I know intimately, and or myself as a performer too. So
Yeah, I think it's probably a lot easier to write when you know the performer in a way where it's like you can kind of write, maybe not exactly to the performer, but, but not away from them.
You can write to the performer. Yeah. I remember writing a scene. We had a guy in our comedy show called Dave. It doesn't matter who he was, but Dave Russell, if you're listening, this is you. And he was just the funniest bastard on earth, and everything he did was funny. And so we'd write a sketch, lots of lines, very specific. This must be said this way, emphasis on this word. And then Dave does bit here. You just leave a space for him. And all right, it's Dave's. He'll handle it. And it's great knowing that you've got people like that are just genuinely funny. No matter
worst
what.
Case scenario, he can just say Dave does bit here, which would probably, depending on delivery, might still get a laugh.
Come on, guys.
Yeah, hey, no holes here, right? So, what are you doing when you're not teaching or comedy? Do you have an escape, or is it? Look, I'll be honest. I'm in the arts all the time. And I don't have an escape from the arts, right?
I have ordinary things that people have. I have a family that I love and books that I read and dogs that I walk. I was actually thinking the other day, I do this little weekly podcast that's much shorter than yours. A finished episode is 12 or 15 minutes typically. But that's multiple hours going into creating that. And I was actually thinking, as I was doing the editing and listening to the voices, you get those voices in your ears while you're editing, and it's almost like being again in the room with the people that you were with. And it occurred to me to think that this is actually a really lovely element, that these are people that I love and enjoy working with. And here I've got them in my ears again, and I'm messing with their words that they said, as we were recording. And to answer your question in kind of a corny way, it is a great happiness to have that as an activity, to know that I'm creating something that I'm proud of, that I think is funny and good, and that I'm creating it with people that I admire. And the mere fact that it takes up a certain amount of time is actually one of the things that I like about it. Yeah,
I went on a crusade, and I want to say there's a good I usually as a peek behind the curtain will edit this and put it on a shelf, and then I will listen to it in order to write the intro and the outro.
Sure, yeah.
I got stuck in a bit of a creative rut, only because I kept talking to creatives and people who have a sentiment very similar to yours, which is I love the process. Right. And so I would get to the end and I'd be like, well, what do I want to talk about from this episode? And I feel like in my back catalog, there's 10 episodes where every other one is me saying, you should all be creating something. You should all go be building something, be writing it, be recording it. Everybody should have their thing. And I've kind of gotten away from it. But in the back of my head, I almost always want to end every show with you can do this, or you can do a comedy show, or you can do you can do anything. But I think not. Look, there was a guest I had on who put it into an amazing perspective, which is inputs and outputs. I don't think any of us, given the world of today, will ever be able to equal our output to our input, and vice versa. We will always be consuming much more than we put out in the world. But the closer to 50-50 we get, or at the very least, the further away from 100% consuming and 0% creating,
right,
the further away from that we get, the better off I think everyone will be. And really, for 3 reasons. 1, I worked in retail, so I give retail people all the time in the world because I know that's bad. Sure. I worked in fast food, so I give all food service industry people all the time in the world. And I spend a lot of time more than the hour 15 minutes this or hour 20, whatever this will end up being. I spend exponentially more time than this creating this. And so
Of
when
course,
I consume a book, listen to a podcast, listen to an album, I'm again more understanding of all of those things. And
yeah. And, I would add on to that. I just read a biography of Sam Houston, one of the, the founders of Texas.
Yeah.
And my one takeaway from this very dense biography was the dude knew everybody. And in one of his letters to, I don't know, Mr. Austin, let's say, or Bill Texas, if there was such a guy, was just a little note. I've got to make my rounds and be social, was his little comment. And it just made me think that's a form of output, using your definition of the word output. And I don't think that you have to necessarily create a thing, play an instrument. That I admire people like Sam Houston in that one regard. I'm not as a slave owner, obviously.
Yeah, I'll say this: we have started hosting dinner parties in a similar vein, where it's like, it didn't skip a generation, but like my parents were both working professionals, so like they would host rarely, but I always heard stories about my grandparents hosting. This wasn't holiday dinners.
Yeah, just to get together,
host a couple couples because.
Yeah, let's whip up a Jell-O salad and get out the Vienna sausages and.
Yeah, and so we have started trying to we've started trying to do one a month with.
I love that.
With another couple, just a group of friends, because it started because we do a Friendsgiving every year. Because family is family, but the family you choose is always much better. And I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. But I was like, I hate that we only do this once a year. Like, I enjoy the house.
That puts a lot of weight on it when you do it once a year. But if you're doing it every so often, it can be a little more casual, right?
Yeah. And so to that end, like we've very much increased our output, because it's like, right. Oh man, like we're not getting out there, but we're getting other people out there, I guess. Yep. In some way.
And I think there's an overlap with all the things that we're talking about. That you and I are communicating here, but we're communicating for the sake of communication. Yeah. Sending this out to the world, right?
Yeah.
And trying to create a virtuous cycle that way. And I honestly think it's one of the most valuable things that. I was going to say we as entertainers, we as, what do we call ourselves?
I mean, I
content
don't mind
creators.
I don't know, but here's the thing. I don't mind being an entertainer. In fact,
I don't at all.
Most of the time I'm the straight man. Mm-hmm. Like I'm even in a group of friends, I'm good for one good line that is just somehow set up perfectly for me. But otherwise, I spend the rest of the evening setting you up for good jokes. If you were
man, that's a good friend right there. Seriously. But we're doing our good deed. You're doing your good deed in that circle of friends. And, I'm just saying that as communicators, let's use that word maybe, that is a great service that we do, because we live in weird times now, but all times are weird, don't you think? And the more we can, now we're hearkening to our past, talking about the past.
Yeah.
As we carry these strains of education, information, entertainment, music, spreading it amongst our circles and spreading it, in this case, we're recording it for the future. So this may be on the golden disc that goes into outer space next time. And, the Earth's communications with the aliens may be this conversation.
Since this conversation, I have been thinking about the greatly exaggerated reports of the deaths of radio, podcasting, and vaudeville, as Danno and I discussed. Sure, you can't go to see a vaudeville show on the stage, but its essence, just like the essence of radio and podcasting, all of which can arguably be combined into storytelling, are alive and kicking here on this side of the early new millennium, more than a century after vaudeville stages and radio programs that launched the entertainment industry as we know it. The cyclical nature of things, right? The more things change, the more they stay the same. Vaudeville as a stage presence may in fact be dead, but its essence is in every variety show put on at high schools and colleges, even camps all around the world. As communicators, Danno and I enjoy the process of storytelling that is at the heart of everything from music to comedy to radio and podcasting and beyond. In this episode, we've told some stories and had some fun, and that's exactly what it's all about. It's not all hokey pokey. So tell me this, or at least think about this. Who are your favorite storytellers? Thanks for listening to the Palmer Files, episode 123. And now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can find all related ways to contact Danno and myself in the show notes. There you can find links to Danno's relevant social channels and his podcast and ukulele websites. The music for this episode was provided by Henno Heitur. Email can be sent to this show at thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. And remember, your home for all things Agent Palmer is agentpalmer.com. All right, Danno, do you have one final question for me?
I have a simple question for you. Introvert, extrovert, somewhere in between. And what's the difference?
Okay, so I believe I would consider myself an introvert.
Okay. Why do you say that?
I get my energy from being alone. The way I took some sociology courses in college, admittedly decades ago at this point.
And sociology has changed over the years, right?
Yes, it has. And I took a psych class or two, but I think somewhere along the way I read in a book, an article, I read somewhere that the difference between an introvert and an extrovert is where they recharge their batteries.
Yeah.
An extrovert recharges their batteries in a group, and an introvert recharges their batteries by themselves.
Yeah. That to me, that seems very reasonable. I'm not sure that's the absolute definition, but I think that definitely describes two types of people.
Yeah. And so I would say I'm an introvert because while I have been able to in the past, and I can work a room,
yeah,
as an extrovert might do, I'm exhausted.
Yes.
You would have thought I ran 13 Boston marathons if I was just at a party with 200 people working the room, versus this where you and I could go for 12 hours and I'll be refreshed at the end.
Yeah, yeah. So if you are in a room of 200 people, what's your inclination? Will you work the room because you feel like that's your duty?
No. Well, only if I'm being like, I haven't worked a crowd of 200 people, like a room like that, since my father's retirement party.
Yeah.
Because I knew half the people, and even though it was his night, I'm his only son, and it felt like I had to also make the rounds.
So it kind of was your duty.
So it was kind of a responsibility. But if I don't have any kind of social construct, I'm going to find the 3 people, 2 people, 1 person that I can hang out with and have this conversation in the corner or over dinner. Just in a, not, it doesn't have to be in a corner, but just that's
sure.
That I'm not seeking, like, despite the fact that this is a podcast that goes out to the world, I'm not seeking that in reality. Digitally, that's fine. You know, like I can make that distinction. Digitally, it's fine. And look, I played in bands on a stage.
Yeah.
I don't know if I still have that in me, but I think that's a whole different thing. But I feel like it's possible.
You know, there's almost a stereotype of actors and maybe musicians too, people who perform for a living, being introverts. That I just read somewhere, I think it was Henry Fonda would throw up every night before he went on the Broadway stage because he was so nervous about being in front of people. But he was an actor. That was his chosen job.
Yeah.
So what do you think it is that makes some people torn between those two extremes of needing to be seen and yet not wanting to be?
I think it's I would dissect it a bit, and I say it's not about being seen. It's about the job at hand.
The job of acting.
I would probably throw up if we were going to do this live in front of even a group of 100.
Well, I've got a surprise for you, crowd. Come on in.
But I think that I could probably do it because after the first 2 minutes, I'm probably going to, and hopefully, and this is what I think happens even if you're facing the audience, you forget the audience is there. Our job is to put on a show for them.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And I think that that's where whatever this show has in just you and me wouldn't change in an audience necessarily, except we would probably take questions and, you know, there would be an audience reaction,
right,
which is something I've not, that's the thing I don't have, which is I don't know how to play to a strange crowd. Like when I talk about having like 6 people over, I know the audience. I know the jokes I can tell. I know the jokes I can't tell, which is probably the more important part of that equation. And I know who's going to laugh at what. For an untrained person, I'm not even going to say comedian, just person, to go and try and play to a crowd, I just don't know that I have that in me. But I could probably, I mean, I don't know what'll happen before we walk out on that stage. I might need the bucket.
Yeah.
But I think once we get out there,
I would suggest that someone like you who says you're comfortable with a room of 6 because you know that room.
Yeah.
That you would have the instincts, maybe with a little bit of time, to be on a stage and to learn that room in the same way. You know, you get a sense for that crowd that night in that space.
That's true. I do. But so here's the rub to that is, if it was going to be something else, that would be fine. I guess I could make an attempt, but if it was going to be this, I think you talking to me one-on-one is a very, I think I could ask you the same questions I asked you in the order I asked them. And if there was 100 people watching, your answers might be different.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And so that's it. It's Schrodinger's podcast, right? Like if there's an audience, is it going to be different? And I feel like even though you are well aware, like you're under no illusions that we're doing this for an eventual audience,
right?
A theoretical audience, but it feels like because it's still just the two of us, even with that knowledge, like I think it changes when there's an audience. I don't know, but
no, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
But yeah,
you're wiser than you think, my friend.
But I'm going to go introvert. Final answer.
Okay. Final answer. And I will, I'll waive my usual psychoanalyst fee tonight.
Oh, good. That's good. 'Cause I don't know if I could afford you.